bottle? I forgot my water bottle. We got to stop the presentation right now so I can go get my.
Everything's open and drinkable. Yeah.
That sounds vaguely sexual in a weird way, or maybe that's just my fucked up thinking.
You're just weird.
I used to be, no, that's true. I am just weird. But when I was in a touring band, yeah, right. That's
awesome.
The singer of my band.
Are you there? What happened? Oh, Chris.
Lux.
Chris, are you there? Chris?
Was
Chris? Are you there? Chris?
saying.
Chris, are you there? Are you there? Chris? Are you there?
So you're here.
Chris, are you there? Chris?
Oh, you can't even hear me. No? No.
I can't. You're gone. Are you there?
No.
Hey.
Test.
Hey, are you there? I can't hear you. I can't hear you. You're coming in broken. Do we need to close this window and open another one?
It's a lot to get some.
You there? Chris? Chris? Are you there?
Chris, can you hear me?
I can hear you now. Are you there? Are you there? Chris?
Yep, this is definitely one of those times where the Chinese government beat out the VPN. No, it's nothing to do with that. It's the firewall in China.
Okay, what do you want me to do?
It always tends to flare up at the worst possible times.
Okay.
So can you hear me now? Am I coming through now?
I can hear you. I can hear you.
Okay. So here's what we're going to do. We'll start this up for everybody that's listening. At least we've only wasted 3 minutes so far. And I'm going to have another team member join just in case I drop out. They can jump in and continue to interview you.
Or can Mia
that's how we're going to play it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it would be Mia.
Yeah.
Exactly. It'll be Mia or Hans, likely.
Okay.
So that's how we're going to play this.
All right. Go ahead. Do what you got to do.
So meanwhile, I'm going to send this link to Mia. And in the meantime, or Hans, in the meantime, you can do like a beatboxing session to keep everybody nice and entertained. Okay. So show them your great beatboxing skills.
All right. So, and we're live. Yeah. Thanks everybody for joining us. Sorry for all this chatter. We had some technical problems. Hopefully you can see me. I will skip some of the who we are until later on and just talk about why we're here today, what we're talking about, which is, and again, sorry for the delay. It's easy to talk about Amazon account suspension horror stories, right? Because it's Q4 and really anytime you get suspended, it's a nightmare. But part of what's been troubling me lately has been the things that are avoidable that people are doing. And it's harder to get back on right now because Amazon, like Seller Performance, my former teams, take more time to get back to people when they submit appeals. That's one problem. Another problem, maybe I'll just start with what's going wrong on the Amazon side, and then we can talk about what sellers are doing wrong. That's especially the avoidable stuff. They're having trouble finding contacts since the summer, which I guess we're still sort of in summer. They've been using new tools. They have an ugly transitional period. I lived through this when I was at Amazon. By the way, I'm Chris McCabe. I worked at Amazon in seller performance for several years. I should have mentioned that up front. And I've been consulting sellers on seller performance and policy enforcement issues for the last 4 years. Yeah, I'm coming up on my 4th anniversary next week, I think. So that's my background, and I've been working on all of this material, account suspension related or not, for the last 10 or 11 years total. So what's been happening lately is, of course, there are investigative teams that have a lot of turnover, especially in India. They don't have a lot of time for training. They don't have a lot of time to audit investigation quality. And now, on top of that, they've got new tools that some of them know how to use, and some of them know where to find your contacts, your appeals, or even your attachments and your invoices. And some of them don't. And they're just trying to keep up. Their email queues are overflowing. A couple of managers have been swapped out. They're trying to get their bearings. So just keep all this in mind before you make some decisions that are potentially risky decisions that could lead to a suspension, number one. Number two, if you are suspended, keep in mind that you can't, just because the last time something similar happened, or maybe if you've never been suspended, you had an ASIN that came down. The last time it was responded to within 2 hours, they answered your appeal. If they needed more information, they sent you a message saying that. If they didn't, they just reinstated it within 2 or 3 hours. That's not necessarily what's going to happen now, and it really isn't the case anytime, because queue levels change hour to hour. It depends on how many investigators are working the queues. It depends on how many sellers are suspended or sending email contacts in. So that's one misconception I see on the forums and various Facebook groups. You haven't heard back for 2 hours from seller performance. You should be emailing them again. Just send them the same thing over and over until they respond. Send something to Jeff. I mean, I see terrible advice on those groups.
Dude, can you read that email that you got where you were copied, the email to Jeff, or is that too private for you to share with our audience? That's actually a good example.
That's a good example.
Because that is pretty funny.
It's a little bit, well, it's funny, but it's also like, remember when you're writing to Jeff, it's not as it was when I was working at Amazon, where there were Bezos escalations that Jeff or one of his assistants would send down to my team, which would end up in my lap usually, me and a few other people.
Oh, talk about lead flow, dude. That's crucial.
So that's
by the way, before you read that email, I just want to introduce Christopher, my teammate, who is going to take over for me if this wonderful government that I would never say anything about continues to firewall us from over here in Shanghai. Right. So, if I get punished, Christopher's going to jump in there.
All right. As long as everyone has
saw my own face. I'm so oily.
You're fine.
Yeah. Oh my God. We've got the trifecta. I didn't even realize that. That's amazing.
Yep.
There's 3.
Chris, we said we would do this. Remember on the last video we did together, we said we would have 3 Chris's on the next call, and boom, here we are.
No Chris Davis today. No Chris Davis.
All the best people I know are named Chris. I mean,
yep. Tell Hans to stay.
I'm just gonna say a quick message. I want to obviously let you guys get back to it. I know Chris, you've come back in here, but Chris McCabe, if Chris has to drop out again, I'll be here to jump back in and help out. But I'll exit for now, and I'll leave you guys to it. And have a great webinar.
Thanks, Chris.
Cheers.
Thank you, bro. Keep an eye on us.
I don't know, should I read the email now or later? The bottom line is people are emailing Jeff that are buyers that are upset when they don't get their orders. Anytime you write to the Jeff at Amazon email, before you consider that your golden nugget, just consider that the entire world knows that email address now. They know that goes to various teams that may or may not run down solutions to your problems. So it's not just sellers who are stuck in the appeals process. It's not just, it's even people who aren't buyers or sellers. Sometimes you don't like the politics of Amazon and have economic commentary. That email address gets everything under the sun. They even closed. At one point there were 8 or 9 different Jeff email addresses. They closed a couple of them that I used to email into or had clients write to. I'm blanking on which ones, but they closed a couple because they didn't want to have to monitor 8 or 9 or 10 different Jeff email addresses. So the bottom line is you can't rely on things like that. You have to avoid a suspension at all costs, of course, and we'll get into some best practices on how to do that in a moment here. If you're suspended, before you think, oh my God, I've got twice as much inventory in FBA now than I usually do, I've got to do something immediately, because the entire account or business will have a heart attack by 4 p.m. if I don't. Consider what damage you might be doing to your odds of reinstatement if you send something sloppy or something disorganized or convoluted because of all the things I mentioned earlier, which were investigators have very little attention span, very little time, and some of them are newer, fresher, and don't have the same skill as a veteran investigator might. And if you lose them in the first few lines of a POA, plan of action, if your appeal rambles or says we don't know why we were suspended, even though the first line of your suspension notification maybe doesn't give you tremendous detail, but it gives you at least some information on why you were suspended. If you go off on the wrong track, they don't bother reading it, especially in Q4. They either send you a denial.
I didn't know what a POA even was
until
you just
too
said
much,
that.
Too many acronyms. Plan of action is the improvement plan. That's the bedrock of your appeal to be reinstated for the ASIN of the account. So I can back up.
And there's a specific format that this needs to be in order for them to hear it.
Yeah, that's one of the things I want to talk about today. I might skip ahead to our how to talk to Amazon section, but since you asked,
okay,
Amazon.
Before we get to that, maybe.
Yeah.
Then before we get to that, if you want to get to that like in a reasonable order, maybe we should hit on the most common mistakes that lead to suspensions.
So when you were offline with the firewall problem, I brought up a series of recent suspensions. Not specifically, I'll get to it in a second. I've seen a lot of things that sellers could easily avoid getting suspended for. And I've seen multiple cases lately. 2 that come to mind. Actually, there are 3 or 4 that come to mind, but the 2 I was thinking of today were product review abuse, of course, has always been a hot topic. I'm sure we've talked about it multiple times. And ASIN variation misuse. A lot of people are creating ASIN variations that aren't compliant with policy. I think a lot of people don't even realize they're doing that. They just see sellers. For example, people are listing multi-packs using quantity as a variation key attribute, and as a variation model, and they're instead of color and size. I mean, it depends on which category you're in.
Okay.
In terms of, but
is that the only kind of variation? Is that the only kind of variation abuse that there is, or are there so break that down a little bit. Like, what are ways that you could get suspended using variations?
If you take a child ASIN, child offshoot of the parent ASIN, and you treat that child ASIN like it's a parent, and you create children from that child, I know this sounds weird, that's a violation. And that's very common. And many people are doing it on purpose, and many people are doing it by accident. I've handled dozens or hundreds of seller cases like that at this point, the last year or two. And I've talked to, maybe it's almost a 50-50 split. Some people are doing it unknowingly. Other people are like, we want more visibility for our products. We see other people doing it. We don't see there's any reason why we shouldn't do this too. But you can't, whether you're doing it intentionally or not, you can't get away with this as much anymore. I mean, 3 weeks ago, how many people said they were suspended for ASIN variation misuse? Dozens, hundreds. I don't know how many I heard from. Not all of them worked with me directly, but they were all making mistakes. And whether or not they're intentional, some people were like, well, we did this by accident. We had a staff member doing it that wasn't trained on Amazon policy with variations. Amazon kind of doesn't care if it's an accident or on purpose. All they care about is you're misusing variations, and that you sort of had no clue either that they were going to enforce this or no clue what you were doing when you were creating these variations. I'm not the best ASIN variation expert. in terms of diagnostic. And, I mean, I work with Leah McHugh on those. She's the best ASIN variation expert I can find that I know. But I also
variation expert. That's the thing.
In terms of, well, a lot of sellers come to me and say, we didn't violate this policy at all. We're following variation policy. And then I say, well, let's unpack that a bit. Tell me what you were doing. And I look at it from, higher level, kind of in terms of what Amazon investigators would see. Typically, I have Leah look at things in the nitty gritty, what happened to this variation, how this was created, how was that created. And there are mistakes found very quickly in whatever, 90% of the cases that we take on. It's common for people not to know they're doing this. And then it's also common for people to just say, well, all my competitors are doing this and I haven't seen anything happen to them, so I'm going to do it too, which of course Amazon doesn't care whether or not your competitors are doing it and getting away with it. They want you to report
that's
them.
It's like getting pulled over when you're speeding and, trying to say, well, everyone speeds. Well, that doesn't.
Everyone was going 80 and you pulled me over. Yeah, everybody was going 80 miles per hour or 120 kilometers an hour. And you only pulled me over in it. And the cop's like, yeah, that's right. Here's the ticket. So
because your car was red. That's what they used to say to me.
Right.
I had this red car and I always got pulled over.
Yeah. So I mean, those are. I mean, that's. If you know what you're doing with variations and you don't obviously break these policies, or even in a minor violation, these days they're so aggressive in enforcement. Even a minor infraction might result in a suspension, especially in Q4. Can you risk something like that just because you've been doing it for a while and nobody stopped you, or just because you think you can claim ignorance down the line because you hadn't properly trained the staff member you hired to do this?
Okay, that's I have to pause you there too, because when you say the phrase, especially with how sensitive, you said that they're getting more and more sensitive to aggressive enforcement.
Yes,
aggressive enforcement. That term makes my butt tickle in like a really bad way. So is that true that over time it's getting worse and worse?
Suspensions are trendy. This is a trendy suspension. I mean, you know that product review abuse suspensions went from trendy to almost all the time because of the significance of that story and how much criticism Amazon had. And then they deleted a bunch of lists of reviews that were even legit and organically sourced, simply because everyone asked, why did that happen? What's going on? I mean, they carpet bombed. They were willing to dump some good reviews as long as they knew they were getting enough bad ones. So if they were criticized later, I mean, this is my theory. I haven't been discussing it with PRA teams, product review abuse, but I mean, this is based on my research, what I've come up with. They were carpet bombing. As long as they took 100% of a certain amount of reviews out, 78% of those were bad. They didn't care if 22% of them were legitimate. So, too bad, so sad. So then as a reaction, what do people do? They're even more desperate for reviews, right? So if you have a magic bullet third-party service that says, we'll get you new ones, whether or not they're compliant in terms of how they conduct those services, a lot of people were desperate and said, I don't care anymore. I'm not getting any sales. I need you to get me new reviews. And they didn't ask any questions. And they started hiring, I saw a lot of people hiring these SEO and review and digital media experts in Bangladesh, for instance. People who had reviews or good scores on Upwork and places like that. Those services weren't interested in being in TOS. They were not compliant, and sellers weren't vetting them or stopping them from taking over their digital marketing strategy, if you want to call it that. But a lot of it was just getting reviews in exchange for offline payoffs and things, incentivized reviews. But so there's trendy suspensions. ASIN variation misuse might go away. Maybe in 3 weeks, we'll never hear from anybody who's being suspended for that. Maybe that means they pretty much got all the ones they wanted to get, or maybe it means they shifted their focus to something else.
Mm-hmm.
Product review abuse, I would say back in 2017.
How recent is this trend? Is this
recent?
Is this like in the last year, or is this in the last month?
The last month. So the article, maybe at the bottom of this, you can put the article that Mia wrote, where she was interviewing me and Leah about this ASIN variation stuff. It was about 3-4 weeks ago it started. I think it's comparable to what happened in 2017 with product reviews, where that was a trendy suspension for a few months, like in the early part of last year, and then it kind of went away for a while. But it came back because abuse was still happening and rampant. And some suspension causes go from trendy, which means coming and going, to constant, right? There's a third type I wanted to talk about, which is submitting infringement reports, like rights owner infringements, when you're not the rights owner, or trying to take a kind of murky gray area infringement complaint, like, oh, this item isn't as described because the warranty hasn't been advertised on the listing, and reporting that as an intellectual property violation, right? Or reporting trademark violations that don't hold water simply because you know Amazon will take out the other seller's listing and send them a warning and maybe even suspend them if it's happened multiple times. So the third kind of horror story suspension or trendy suspension I've seen lately is unsubstantiated rights owner infringements. It's kind of a long story. Yeah.
Screw those guys.
I know.
I hate those people.
Yeah. It's kind of a long story in terms of where this comes from. It's a combination of sellers who wanted to offer brand protection services to brands in exchange for exclusivity. Some of that. Some of it was sellers getting together with certain law firms that wanted to use this as a sort of weapon to have anti-competitive behavior pay off, and using Amazon as the tool of enforcement. And that, of course, is being unraveled now. I mean, maybe in 2017 into this year, you could try sending cease and desist letters to sellers just to see how many would drop off if you were reselling a brand. And some of it was just the brands are like, well, we have sellers on this stuff on Amazon, and we don't want them there. We don't like the pricing. We don't like a lot of things about them. Why don't you just handle this for us? Whether they go to a law firm or a reseller. The problem is you don't suspend law firms. If a law firm is encouraging resellers to submit infringements to Amazon notice teams, and they don't hold water and they're not substantial, and notice disputes sent by the target will knock them down and get their listings reinstated, eventually they come calling for you, and they come and take your account away for submitting these to begin with. And there was just a lot of naive behavior and activity around, well, nobody asked what are the possible risks for me if I refashion myself as a brand enforcer, or even if you've got your own private label brand and you're making unsubstantiated legal claims, patent infringement claims, trademark claims against sellers, and you don't have any documentation to back it up, or again, you're using the wrong law firm that's like, oh, we can do this, we'll do this to them, we'll do that to them, and they're just taking your fees. They're not going to be suspended, unless Amazon sends your law firm a cease and desist, which I think I've already heard of that happening in the past. They're not going to suspend the law firm. They suspend the seller account associated with this activity. To me, that's 100% avoidable. Like, you've either got a legitimate rights owner infringement complaint that the notice teams can act upon, or you're screwing around and you're screwing yourself.
Exactly. And screwing other people. Like, I just, as like a very quick 30-second aside here, another thing besides sending cease and desist letters or whatever, reporting to Amazon, other brands for false trademark infringement, is straight up like bribery, or not bribery. What is it called when you collect money from someone so that you don't do something? Extortion. Yes. Thank you, Chris. See, this is why two Chris's are better than one. Right. I had a friend in mastermind group that I was in who's
all right, are you there? Chris number 2? Are you there? I'm going to keep going. I can't, just so everyone knows, I can't really see comments.
And not a patent troll. Some of the Earth lawyer was trolling the internet looking for companies that basically violate, that make a certain claim about a certain disease or something.
Yeah.
It really wasn't like, my friend's business was not like falsifying anything. It was just a specific like word that they had in their listing that they could create a class action lawsuit against. And New Jersey, where I'm from, you can do a class action lawsuit of one. It's one of the only states where you can do a class action lawsuit of one. So this lawyer was going around suing people with class action lawsuits of one, and then trying to settle out of court so that they don't have to deal with the headache. And my friend ended up having to pay 10 grand.
Yeah. And there's keep in mind, there's a lot of nonsense that Amazon doesn't want to be involved with. And they know They know they don't have to be caught in the middle, and they know they are getting caught in the middle. So when people have sort of infringement submission remorse and say, why did you take this aggressive, harsh action on me? I didn't know I thought I was submitting a proper rights owner infringement. I had legal counsel tell me I could do this. They don't care. They'd rather just get rid of you if it gets rid of all these forms you're sending them, even if it isn't high quantity. If you're getting them caught in the middle of potential legal disputes, their liability is going up, not to mention they have to keep tasking investigators to read and respond to these things, then you're more trouble than you're worth. And if you get suspended for this, your appeal has to cover, I'll never do this again because, and a lot of that has to convince them that you're not going to create these headaches for them, because you yourself, in most cases as a seller, aren't a lawyer trained in these IP and trademark and infringement issues.
Exactly.
And Amazon doesn't care if you're gullible and you listen to crappy legal advice. That's on you. That has nothing to do with Amazon. Amazon doesn't care that when you were suspended for a legal related issue, you only did your homework for 10 seconds to do a Google search, and you found some law firm that popped up quickly that you saw a few, reviews saying, hey, they helped us with our legal problem. That's on you. It's your job to figure out if you can trust your law firm. It's your job to figure out if you should send this infringement at all. Amazon's job is to suspend you if they get a bunch of notice disputes saying this has no merit. This is baseless, this is groundless, and this seller never should have submitted this infringement against me to begin with. Because to Amazon, don't forget, you're messing with competition, which could be messing with pricing, which could be messing with selection. You're messing with the marketplace when you start using these weapons, these tools, just to take out competition, and you don't have the legal basis for it. That's the bottom line. So I don't know. Are you getting questions?
And that goes against their.
Yeah. Do you have a feed of questions
goes against their. I do. Yeah, we do. So far we've got actually quite a few, but we can wait another. Yeah, exactly. We can wait another 15 minutes or so and then tackle them all at the end there.
Okay. So
but in the meantime,
are we taking too long in this section?
No, it's actually fine because you keep coming up with gems that I wouldn't have even asked you about since you're so deep into this.
Yeah. I'm skipping around, but.
So why don't we go to that POA that you mentioned earlier, that plan of action? What is that? How do you generate one?
So the format.
And how do you verbiage it?
Yeah, this is really, really important. So I want to say this before I forget. A lot of people, I have like a service now where for half an hour, I'll review your plan after you've written it and tell you yay or nay, or this needs changes and so forth. It's on my website. You can book a half an hour. A lot of people are using the format that seller support gives them when they call, or they're using the one they are given by Account Health Services. Those are the guys who call you when you're suspended, or even sometimes 24 hours before the suspension to say, hey, you're about to be suspended, but we need a plan of action from you, like a pre-POA. But they give you a format. The problem is the teams giving you that format aren't giving you a format that's conducive to proper review and a positive reaction or reinstatement by seller performance. And this isn't something I've been talking enough about, I guess, yet, but I'm going to be talking about it more because their format has multiple sections which tend to encourage sellers to just fill in the blank, tell us this, tell us this, tell us this. And people go crazy. They feel like they have to answer all of those. Those are just guide points or suggestions. They like to say, is sourcing the problem? Is listing accuracy the problem? Is the packaging the problem? Is your supplier the problem? There's all sorts of stuff that they prompt you to address, and sellers are addressing all of them instead of picking out the one that applies in their case. So that's one problem. People are writing really long POAs that no one in seller performance is reading because it's too long and it's repetitive. And they're also, I guess my second point is they're giving you 3 core sections to fill in, which is give us the causes of the complaints, A. B, tell us what you did to resolve the complaints, and C, what steps have you put into place to make sure these complaints don't happen again? Sounds great in theory, but B and C, what you did to resolve them and what you're doing to prevent it again. In my plan of action, when I'm doing this for sellers, I combine that in the same bulleted list and I just say plan of action at the top. I don't divide those into 2 sections. Why do I do that? Well, number one, for the last 3.5 years, we've had a lot of success with our format. Number 2 is Sellers that are following the Amazon format are repeating themselves over and over in both sections. And if they think you're saying the same thing over and over, whatever format you use, whether your bullets say the same thing one after the other, in their format or mine, it doesn't matter. They don't read it. They stop reading it. They're like, you just said that in the previous section. You just said that in the last bullet. You're rewriting the previous bullet. This is a waste of my time. Goodbye. That's the net result. And that's why a lot of people using Amazon's own format, I'm starting to get a lot of people, well, why do you want me to use your format? Amazon already gave you the format. It's because their format doesn't coalesce or dovetail well with the way these things are reviewed in 2 minutes, sometimes 2.5, 3 minutes. They're in and out, and it doesn't make you more likely to get reinstated. It makes you less likely to get reinstated.
Yeah, and you would know, because for those of you viewers that don't know, Chris is an ex-Amazonian. Chris actually worked inside the belly of the beast, so he knows how things go in there.
I went over it when you were offline.
Dude, that's cold.
I know. It's sort of misleading because I've seen very few of those where I look at it and I say, you know what? The 2 sections really can stay 2 sections. I like the way this was presented. I like the way it was written. No, usually it's people go off on these tangents. People are talking about, well, we do this for packaging. We do this for sourcing. They try to answer everything because they're afraid of leaving anything out. It makes it a 2-page POA. Nobody reads a 2-page POA unless they can tell by looking at it, skimming it, that everything they need is there. Everything that they can accept to get you reinstated is there. They will keep reading. If it's a 1.5 pages, sure. That's an extreme minority of cases. Everyone else is like, they're saying the same thing over and over. They've written a lot of comments here that have nothing to do with why they were suspended. So those are just like talking points that they're giving you when they tell you about your incoming suspension or why you were suspended. They are just prompting you to figure out the causes. They're trying to get you to get your customized. They don't want you using templates. All these companies selling templates are selling you worthless information. They want you to customize and tailor your appeal to your circumstances. I can't say that.
So this almost sounds scary because it's like asking me to indict myself almost. It's like, tell us all the bad things you're doing in a way, right?
Not all the bad things. No. See, that's what sometimes people take that approach. It's the bad things or the mistakes that were associated with the reasons you were suspended. I'll admit that in a few edge cases, they really just don't tell you why you're suspended. But 75 to 90% of the people who contact me and say, I have no idea why I was suspended, I'm able to figure it out in talking to them for a minute or looking at their account for 2 minutes.
Amazing. Okay, so dude, this is where we need to get inside your head.
Yeah, some of that's psychological. I think some of that's the knee-jerk, I didn't do anything wrong. It's not so much a debate about whether or not you did something wrong. They've identified a flaw or multiple flaws either with your products or with your performance or with something on your account, and you have to have a cold hard conversation with yourself about what actually happened, what could have been improved. Any of us have things that can be improved with any of our businesses, and if they're just being harsh with you, then that's just a fact of life with Amazon.
But
the bottom line is
So what's in your head that's not in our heads when we say we have no idea and then you in 1 minute can figure it out? Like if I wanted to do that myself, what is my step-by-step process to discover in the same way that you are to discover myself, if I had to do this myself, why I got suspended? Like what are the steps I take?
Well,
like the
first step,
defined steps I take.
Yeah. And I realize that when you're suspended, I mean, we're going to talk in a few minutes about if you're unable to avoid a suspension, what are the kind of emergency steps to take when you're first suspended. And one of them, of course, is don't just start defending yourself out of anxiety because you think that Amazon made a mistake. Don't start writing messages to them saying, you made a mistake. I did nothing wrong. You have to kind of find somebody objective. I mean, really, one part I offer is objectivity. Some of it's experience because I've seen several like cases when people come to me and show me what happened to them. But a lot of it's just objectivity. I'm not working on your account every day unless you're one of my retainer clients, right? You're seeing it very close up all the time. You've got a lot of emotion associated with it. You might think that you've been overly punished for a minor infraction, but that doesn't mean there's no basis for the suspension. So kind of lift out of the conversation from the very beginning, this shouldn't have happened to me. I'm being unfairly treated. I see people doing what I do all the time, and they haven't been caught, and I've been caught, what we said a moment ago. When it's like, I mean, if it's a performance-based suspension, just to chop this into smaller pieces, go to your metrics. I mean, I know we all assume that we're looking at our metrics all the time. Some of us are, some of us aren't. But for example, in Q4, like if you're missing your late shipment rates, they are much quicker to suspend you. A lot of those suspensions are automated in Q4. They have this concept called holiday war teams. And all that really means is you're flagged a lot quicker, and you're either reviewed faster and probably reviewed in rapid succession by an investigator, or your suspension is just automated. You start missing metrics.
Holiday war teams?
It's a fancy term for you miss your late shipment rates, you're over 4%, you're much more likely to get an automated suspension. You start canceling orders because items are out of stock, or you have a technical issue, whatever it might be, order fulfillment problems, you're much more likely to get an automated suspension. And then investigators have like an investigative bucket where sellers who aren't facing an automated suspension are thrown into that, and they go through, they review them one by one, and they size them up for a suspension. But obviously, if you have metrics misses during Q4, your odds of that outcome being a suspended account are much higher, right? And quite honestly, it's quicker and easier for an investigator to take a quick look at your account, find something wrong, which if your metrics are out of whack, it's easy to do that, and decide to suspend you and move on to the next one, versus looking at the history, looking at, you know, whether or not you've had a recent issue that's been annotated on your account that would account for a metrics miss. It could be a reasonable story behind it, but they'd rather suspend you and get the reasonable story later. That's what the holiday's all about. They don't want you on there selling if you're having problems that you haven't resolved yet. So if you're not suspended for performance reasons, I mean, most of the stuff we work on is policy violations, item quality complaints, item not as described. Sometimes it's safety complaints, right? Items are defective, or the buyer can't use them. Could be consumables like vitamins or supplements that made them sick. It could be electronics overheating that they think are a fire hazard, that burn them, you know, a charger that burns you when you're trying to plug it in, take it out of the outlet. So any of these things are going to be treated a lot more harshly in Q4. So if you've got safety complaints now, so forgetting about the metrics now, which are a bit more straightforward, if you've got safety complaints coming in now, if you have all these condition complaints, they call it used, sold as new. Those are essentially just item condition complaints for buyers. You've got items that are DOA, defective on arrival, dead on arrival, if you're doing electronics. You've got damage that keeps recurring to your products, or you have repeated complaints that, hey, these products aren't the way they're described in the detail page. I mean, if you've got that going on now, then even though you're losing some money, deactivate the listing and figure out what's going wrong, either in the shipment process or in your listing review process. Whatever is going wrong with item quality, make sure you fix it, because logically you would be getting more orders for those items that you always sell during Q4. I mean, for most people, right? So if you're getting more orders, the likelihood, like let's say safety complaints, I mean, they don't care about the percentages of safety complaints when they think people are getting sick or being harmed by buying your product. It could be 1 or 2 or 3 out of 10,000. So if you're getting safety complaints now, deactivate the listing, maybe inspect the inventory, maybe pull some units out of FBA that you were really hoping to sell, because you don't want to let a performance notification fester. I still see a lot of sellers who just ignore notifications. I'm not sure why. Some of them do want to respond. They don't want to ignore it, but they really don't know how. They don't know how to communicate what they're doing with their quality control, with their due diligence.
Yeah, so that's a good question, though. What do you do if you get a notification and you know that you're in some type of violation? Because, I mean, in all honesty, there's so many, you can be in violation without being like, I don't know, a bad person. Like you didn't know it. And then, you know, now you have all this inventory and you're in some kind of violation. What do you do in that case when like you have to respond, but you're like, well, what do I say? Like, you know,
I mean, policy violations, when it comes to like a warning for product review abuse or for making improper changes in detail pages, or like we said before, the infringement claims, really all you're doing is saying, okay, we've put several steps into place to make sure that we never violate this policy again. A lot of sellers just send in like an apology and they say, we'll never do it again, annotate our account, but they say nothing about how. Give them a list of how. And maybe you can give them a root cause, an explanation. Yeah. Give them an explanation for how this happened, what oversight, what mistake led to this to begin with. If you don't have a hell of a lot to say about how it happened because you were doing it intentionally, you just need to promise you won't intentionally abuse policies in the future, or come up with, you can come up with an excuse if it's a mistake. You can tell them we weren't watching our staff appropriately, we weren't following up on processes we had internally and looking at, how they might be failing us. But the bottom line is you're giving them a bulleted list of solutions that convince them it's not going to happen again. They'll annotate that on your account. I mean, that's much better than just saying, well, we got caught doing something, or we got flagged for something, we're just going to stop doing it, or we're just going to stop selling that product because the return rates are too high, or the complaints about safety or inauthentic are too high, and we're just going to do that on our own. We're not going to say anything to Seller Performance because we don't want to, poke the bear or poke the dragon. We don't want to get in trouble. We don't want them reviewing our whole account. The bottom line is, if you've already gotten the notification, they've already looked at your account for this. If you continue to get more complaints like that for existing orders, even if you deactivate the listing today, you will get more complaints, and they'll review you again for those ASINs. But if they review you and they see you've deleted the listing and pulled the inventory, and you've already sent them an email, here's my removal order number, we're inspecting these products before we sell them again. Or if you're giving up on the product, we've deleted the listing entirely, we've sold through the inventory, it's not going to be coming back. If you explain that in a short email that a Seller Performance Investigator has time to read, gives them time to annotate your account, then the next investigator who comes along, who finds that, sees that, maybe it would have been better if it never happened to begin with, but it did happen and you resolved it, right? So you've communicated something to them that shows you're reading things, that shows you're alive, that shows you're breathing. You're not just cowering in fear in the corner, like hoping to stay off their radar. Because actually, I mean, in my experience, you're more likely to surface on their radar if you're not willing to show them that you're taking action, number one, and describe those actions to them.
Okay, so my takeaway there is poke the bear. Don't cower in fear. So over communication is better than trying to stay quote unquote off the radar.
At least in terms of when the bear has already poked you. That's something I don't understand.
So when the bear pokes you, poke back.
Yeah, like I mean, maybe some people listening can explain this to me. I'm sure some of it's just seller psychology, but this concept of, well, I had 3 notifications this month and I haven't countered or responded to any of them because I don't know what to say, or I'm afraid they're going to review my whole account. I mean, in theory, they're already looking at your account, and they're supposed to look at other aspects of your account that might be going wrong when they send you these notifications. So I guess their thinking is that, well, I think they only had time to look at this one thing, this one ASIN, this one complaint, and they quickly warned me and they quickly moved on. But you can't really make that assumption. I mean, that's sort of gambling with the fate of your account to assume that they didn't look at anything else. I mean, you can't read your Amazon account annotations, right? And you can't just send Jeff a letter and say, I'd like to look at all the annotations on my account. Do you mind sending that by the end of the day? Because I'm worried about Q4 and an account suspension. I mean, this is your only
balls. That was my plan.
This is like your only real way of keeping up. This is your only defense, is to show them. I mean, if you give them a series of due diligence steps after you had a couple of complaints about item authenticity or safety complaints, whatever it might be, condition of the items, they see that you're working the problem. I mean, they might not love your solution if you don't describe it well, or if you don't have a solution, you just write them and say, well, we're working on it. I mean, I don't recommend that. Go to them with some completed actions. I mean, maybe not all those actions have 100% come to fruition, but they see that you're working on it, and they see that you know what's going on, right? You're alive. You're not ignoring things. You're not delegating account management. Well, we have a third-party service that manages our account. Or, well, we have somebody we hired last week who's managing our account. It's like, well, it sounds like you're too busy to keep an eye on this stuff. But guess what? You know, in the end, somebody responsible has to be taking care of it. Otherwise, they're not going to get into a prolonged debate about why you should have been suspended a month ago versus today. They just suspend you when they have to. So, is this making sense?
Yeah, definitely. So I think since we have 15 minutes or 16 minutes left, so we should get to the question soon. But lastly, I do want to ask one thing that, just because I think it'd be valuable for everybody listening. what are like the right now? Because you said there are like trends, like Amazon account suspension trends. Right now, at this moment, what are the top 4 reasons that accounts are getting suspended?
So I gave 3 of them, right? The infringement abuse. I mean, all kinds of abuse, listings abuse, product review abuse. Let's just put that into one category. Abusing policies.
Okay. Abuse.
Just put review abuse and marketplace abuse in the same batch. ASIN variation misuse, right? We talked about that one. And we talked about, of course, performance metrics. If you're in Q4, you can be auto suspended anytime you go out of range. Not every time, but you could be. And what was the other one I was talking about? Oh, I talked about ASIN variation misuse. Safety complaints, any kind of item quality, item authenticity complaint. Because investigators sometimes can't find your attachments, they can't find your invoices, or if you're a reseller and you're attaching a letter of authenticity from the brand, from the supplier, and you attach it to the email, they might not actually be able to open it or locate it in their tools. Sometimes people who are sent authenticity warnings and you respond to them, but then they write back, right? They say, we need more information, we need invoices, we need supplier information. Sometimes they don't find the information you're sending and they suspend you, because they're like, well, we've already emailed you about a few different ASINs and you didn't send us the invoices, or you didn't send us links to your supplier websites. You just gave us a phone number to a store somewhere. They just move you to suspension. I mean, they don't continue this back and forth week in, week out when it's Q4. If they think you've got repeat item quality problems and you haven't resolved them from prior notifications, then they just move you to suspension. The more you get hit with these notifications, the higher you're climbing the algorithmic ladder towards the suspension, right? So I think that was 4. Yeah. Those are the top 4 I'm working on. I mean, I don't know of anything this week. It's Thursday here. I don't know of anything that's hit this week that's like brand new this week. I mean, I could think about it, but
okay, no, that's very helpful.
They're more aggressive in Q4. They see you doing things that other sellers have been doing, and it's trendy for them to take. I mean, just be logical about it. They sit in meetings and they say, what have you been seeing lately? Well, I've seen a bunch of sellers doing this. So it's not going to help you to say, well, I've been listing my multi-packs this way for a long time because everybody else was doing it. It's like, yeah, you've been doing it as a group. You live or die as a group. If they see a trend, if they see all of you doing the same thing and they decide to enforce it because they rotated around to that particular trend, then they take you all down at the same time, right? Last July, I think it was July 3rd of last year, how many people were suspended for having too many infringements against them, resellers? Too many infringements came in within a certain time period. Maybe it was 30 days. There were hundreds of people suspended within a couple of hours in July of 2017.
Wow.
They decided, we don't even really need to know what those conversations were like. All we know is between legal teams, notice teams, policy teams, managers, whoever was involved, they decided we've been getting tons of these over and over every hour. Everyone's getting suspended because quite clearly they're selling items that the brands don't want them to sell, and the brands are using the notice process to submit these infringements. We don't adjudicate infringements. We do not mediate legal disputes. What do? We suspend accounts who get too many infringements within a tight time frame. That's how simple it is on their side. They identify the trend. They circle the wagons. They have a 1-hour meeting. I mean, I only say this because I was there. It's still the same thing. And nowadays it's easier. I mean, how many notice infringement warnings did I send in my time? I was sending way more warnings now than they do these days, than they do now. These days, they're much more likely to just suspend you because guess what? It's a lot easier to do one investigation.
Easier. Yeah.
It's quicker.
And it matters way less. For you, it's your whole life. For them, you're just another seller.
Well, for them,
so,
it's
and
like
I want to get to these questions because we have a lot
I've
of
said
them.
enough.
Yeah.
I've said enough.
Yeah. We've got, well, you're going to have to say more now. We've got a lot to get through, so let's try to hit each one in just a minute or two.
I shouldn't have booked a consult at the end of this because it looks like we're going to go over a few minutes, right? So.
Let's see. Hopefully we can bang through these. So first one comes from Rob Shen, and he says, how about me? I've been suspended due to invoice. Do you know what he's referring to, Chris?
Something's missing on his invoice or his supplier isn't verifiable. So is there any way to chat back and ask him? I see the questions.
Yeah.
It's just it's kind of tiny, so I can't really read them.
Yeah, no, I got you. I'll be the moderator here.
You're gonna
I'll be the moderator.
We more information on his, but do you want to skip on down to the next one?
Yeah, Ravshan, you can, if you're still with us, you can give us a little more information there. We'll try to get to it. Then we have another one from Martin who's saying, I'm suspended due to fakes, but I have a statement from the manufacturer that these products are genuine. What can I do?
You might want to figure out if you've attached the authenticity letter along with an acceptable invoice. The invoice is legible, dated within the last year, all the basic things. It'd be interesting to know if he submitted that before the suspension or after the suspension as part of the appeal. Let's just assume he submitted it as part of an appeal. Did they deny it? Did they say the supplier wasn't verifiable? Are the complaints about the quality of the items you got from the supplier or the authenticity of the items? Are they all fake, counterfeit? I bought this before, this isn't genuine, or are people complaining about the actual quality of the item? Because this is something I should probably say. A lot of inauthentic, quote unquote, complaints aren't about authenticity, even though that sounds strange to say. They're about people complaining about this doesn't match the listing detail page.
Right, yeah.
Or it's just like, I don't like the quality. I mean, I wish they would break these into two different groups, and hopefully someday they will, because I complain about this a lot. But a lot of the complaints about authenticity are just, this was cheap, this doesn't work. It's not necessarily that it doesn't look like the item they bought the last time they bought that brand. So.
All right. Well, hopefully that helps you, Martin. We got one from Heather who's saying, our subscribe and save listing is suspended, and they say I need to wait 2 weeks after my price has stabilized to be reactivated. Our price has been stabilized for more than 2 weeks, but it's still not active.
Probably just need to follow up, maybe do an escalation. You could try to do a 911 escalation through seller support, but I don't actually use seller support that much just because of what we all know about how effective they are. Right to seller performance. Seller support? No, I mean 90% of what we're doing is helping people write emails to seller performance, product quality, sometimes notice teams. Obviously, we help people with hijacked listings and product review abuse that they have to report.
Specific emails that you send to?
Yeah. I mean, I'll give some specific cues, and maybe we can add it to the text afterwards. We're going to give them.
All right, so we're
going to give you links.
Emails that you can send these to in the handout for this.
We'll add it to
at the end of this webinar. Yeah. So you can either respond to the email that you got inviting you to this webinar in order to get that handout, or you can email me if you want, Chris@Judolaunch.com, or you can ask Chris at ecommercechris.com, and we'll email it right to you. And that'll include those emails.
A lot of this, actually, I just wanted to throw this out before we get too close to the top of the hour. The membership we have is all about preventing suspensions, and it's $500 a year.
Yeah, tell us about that.
Yeah, I mean, if you I'll do a free half-hour consult for anyone who buys the membership, I guess today or within the next 24 hours. So it's almost 11 a.m. Eastern on the 13th. I'll timestamp myself. The membership is about reviewing your own account to catch problems with ASINs, metrics, policy violations, whatever it might be, before Amazon conducts an official investigation or review of your account. And then if you lose an ASIN and you need to get it reinstated, how to build a POA to get it back. Those are the two main modules and courses in my membership. And then we also have a Facebook group that's private where we discuss a lot of these community issues that multiple sellers are facing. But bottom line, the point of the membership is preventing a suspension, which of course suspensions are much more costly at this time of year than any other time of year. So it's ecommerchechris.com/membership. And I'm happy to answer questions about that. I know there's going to be some questions we don't get to in the Q&A. I've seen a couple of them pop up about ASIN variation misuse, and some of them I'll deal with anecdotally afterwards. But go ahead with the next one.
Excellent, dude. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. That's
talking
awesome.
As fast as I can.
Yeah. No, you're doing great. Cool. So we got another one from Christian. He's saying, oh wait, hang on. Oh, okay. So that was clarification on the POA, which I think you have already hit
upon. And by the way, just one quick interjection. A lot of these suspension causes, if you're already suspended, they are fixable if you do it right. Just this morning, I had somebody who was suspended for product review abuse right before we started the webinar who got reinstated. And they were kind of a difficult case, actually. And we got them back on pretty quickly. So this is fixable. But if you start getting lost in this cycle of back and forth and we don't know what's missing, we don't know what to say in a POA, these days in Q4, longer response times, fewer investigators who have time to sort through the muck and the back and forth in your account annotations. So handle it right the first time or the second time. After that, you're kind of on your own. Go ahead.
Awesome. All right. I just want to make a quick little announcement here because a couple people wanted more clarification on the POA. Since we only have a couple minutes here, we'll add that to the handout, the webinar handout, to tell you the structure of the POA written down, because we have a couple people saying how many sections should it have, what should they say.
So, I see question number 5. I got it. I have them in front of me now.
So we'll add that in there, and you guys can get that from the handout just by responding to that email or emailing me or Chris, and I'll pop the emails.
I can go a couple minutes past the top of the hour just to make sure we get these. Are really, by the way, we should do this again. These are awesome questions. I don't know who's listening today.
I know.
The quality
of cool because I like when people ask about their own accounts. It's because everybody else listening can be like, oh, okay, well, so now I know what to do in that scenario. So we've got Julie. I know you see the questions now.
I can see them now. I should have been looking at my phone. Question 5, 6, 7. These are awesome questions.
We received notice of ASIN violations for ASINs that were not part of our inventory, but were assigned to our account by Amazon. How do we fix that?
So there was something that cropped up this week that was a recent, I don't know how many people were actually suspended for it, but I've been helping people who were warned for listing items and they were like, I've never listed this. That sounds like kind of a bit of a technical glitch to me. There aren't a lot of glitches that result in things like this. But people are getting warned for stuff that they told me they had never sold. I think some of those cases they sold it a long time ago and they forgot about it. So that's something, it's something that has to be dealt with anecdotally because obviously it's a mistake on their side. Tell them you never listed the item. It's not that you never sold it. You have to say that you never listed it. Big difference. Because anything you sold anytime in the past, you might get an email that says, hey, you shouldn't have sold blank and we're taking all these listings down, and you're thinking, I sold it 3 years ago. What are you talking about? The problem with some of their tools is they're warning you if you ever sold something. It's easier for them to grab everybody that ever sold it and not spend time separating that list between the people who currently do and don't. I know that sounds crude and crazy, but that's actually, for their tools and their teams, that's an easier way to do it. So you just tell them, like, I haven't sold this for 3 years. I've never sold this.
And get your account email them. Which email is that Julie should be emailing to?
The seller-performance-policy@amazon.com. Most people also know the email queue pq-sv-appeal@amazon.com. That used to be kind of a lesser known queue.
Awesome. And we'll include all these emails in the handouts, guys. Vivek says if my attachment size is more than... No, go ahead. Is there one you want to hit?
No, I mean, somebody asked me about the discount for the membership. I don't have a discount for the membership today. I have a free 30-minute call that I'll offer, or if you want to do written consult, that I'll offer to anybody who buys the membership in the next 24 hours. You get a 10% discount on my services if you buy the membership. So I thought I'd just mention that. Any member gets a 10% discount on anything I do consulting-wise. Go ahead.
Kicking. That sounds like a good deal. So Vivek is asking, if my attachment size is more than 10 megabytes, should I break attachments into several emails and send to seller performance team?
Yeah, that's what people have been doing. It's unfortunately working worse now to do that than it used to. It used to be very effective to do that. Now things are getting lost more. But if you start sending them, zip folders, and I mean, sometimes they're like, we don't download this stuff. We don't open these, or it takes too long. The load times, this is probably worth mentioning. The load times with the new tools that they're using are like 10 times longer. I think the engineers might have built a overly laden, cumbersome tool with too many tabs, too many windows, whatever it is. And it's taking longer for them to load documents. So just the best, cleanest way you can show them the invoices you have to attach and authenticity letters. I mean, usually people send attached PDFs and just try to break it into, I mean, if they pull up your account by the primary email address, they can see all the contacts you sent them. They should be, if you've sent them multiple, they should be able to go through one by one and open the attachments one at a time. I hope that made sense.
Awesome. Okay, that is helpful. These specific things actually become important when you're dealing with Amazon, because format is just as important as content. It seems like I obviously I'm not the expert here, but that's the impression I'm getting. Right. And by the way, we are at the end of our webinar time here. Chris, would you possibly, because everyone is being so engaging here, asking these questions, would you be able to go over an extra 10 minutes?
Yeah, I mean at least 5 anyway. I mean, I've got word that my 11
okay.
consult can wait. So.
All right, sweet. And then in that case,
go ahead. I'm reading the questions while you're looking. Yeah.
Okay, great. Yeah. Also, let me just say, also my bit, which is that active monitoring and management of an account can avoid these problems preventatively. So when you're getting seller performance notifications, making sure they're being responded to in time, making sure that your listings are being monitored, and that you're, if you get any of these false, infringements, that you can respond to them. And so one thing that we can help with, that Judolaunch can help with on that side, is our active account management service, which we take a very unique approach to this. Our account management includes listing monitoring, all customer service, seller performance, seller central communication, seller performance notification response, and we have economies of scale at our disposal here, which make it actually extremely affordable. So it starts at $500 a month, believe it or not, for all of this account management, which, I mean, that's as cheap as you can get. There's no way you're going to hire somebody for that cost. And being that I'm the CEO of this company, that's where it starts. So it depends on the number of ASINs. Right, so that's if there's one parent ASIN. That's like the basic. So it depends on the account. But being that I'm the CEO of this company, I can noodle with things the way that other team members can. And I'm decreeing right now that if somebody decides to engage with us for active account management in the next 24 hours, we're going to give half off of the first month. So that's a very special offer. In order to get that, you have to email me directly, because nobody else in my organization has the authority to do that. So great. I get to be the big boss man.
Email people named Chris. So that's the big message today.
Plug there.
Email people named Chris. If you take nothing else away from today, it's email people named Chris.
All right, let's try to hit a couple other things in the next 3 minutes.
I found a question. Can you insure yourself against fake IP complaints from competitors? The notice dispute, I'll try to give a quick answer to this. The notice dispute process, which didn't exist until 18 months ago, was built to ensure that if you have a fake infringement against you, you can dispute it, and you can get that mark removed from your record. You can get maybe the listing reinstated, resolve that case. But make sure that you're not an untrained legal mind making the decision that it's a fake complaint. If it's an obvious fake complaint, you don't want to spend a few $100 having a lawyer look at it for you. I understand that. You can try a notice dispute. Just make sure that you understand, if you dispute a notice and it's valid, that's going to be another strike against you. I mean, you have to understand this material. You can't start saying this is fake, I have every right to sell this. That's not what a lot of notice claims are about. A lot of notice claims that people tell me are fake or invalid or unsubstantiated are to Amazon considered valid, rightful complaints, and they will enforce them, and they won't get into legal discussions with you or mediate legal disputes. So if you're going to do a bunch of notice disputes, make sure they're fake. There's no real way to immunize you from getting the notice in the first place, unless you're whitelisted, which is not really a thing. So that's the notice-dispute at Amazon.com. I kind of worked briefly with notice teams on a top 10 list of pain points in terms of notice dispute. I mean, I think they folded maybe 5 of those into the notice dispute process. So I'm happy to talk with anybody about that offline.
Awesome. All right. I think we have time for one, maybe two questions, because there's one that's super short. Is there one that you specifically want to respond to, Chris? Or
I just wanted to answer Christian really quickly. Christian was asking me about the format of the POA. 99% of the time, I want the core sections, obviously not the introduction, not your brief conclusion. The two core sections in the middle are root causes, bullet, 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 or 2 bullets or 3 usually. That's one part. Put all the causes there. Don't talk about solutions there. The solutions are for the plan of action. Part 2, POA, plan of action. They understand. You don't have to explain to them that those are where your proactive solutions go. That's where you describe how this will never happen again, what you've done to resolve it. Obviously, you want some organization to those bullets. You don't want to slap them in there in any order. But you want it to have some steady flow in terms of addressing the root causes you just highlighted, but also attacking the problem from other angles to make sure it doesn't happen on other ASINs or other products or other metrics. Make it sound like a boot camp of due diligence steps that you've undertaken and that you've already completed. That's the quickest way I have to describe it. So that's that question. And then which one did you have?
All right, maybe this will be our last one then.
This will be our last one, yeah.
This seems like something that could be applicable to a lot of people. So D is asking, how does Amazon verify the suppliers? How can we prove the authenticity of our products if the supplier denies to provide us with an authenticity letter?
All right, awesome question. They call them these days. A year ago, they weren't making phone calls so much. Nowadays, you have to expect that they're going to call them. They want phone numbers.
Them in China?
Call them. I mean, they're less likely to call them in China in reality, but on paper, they could call them anywhere in theory. They want to know quantities, right? They want to match the quantity to your invoice. They want to make sure that they're calling a real person who's actually your supplier. You should be giving a link to the website for your supplier. I mean, I'm trying to give rules that apply to private label or reselling. But when it comes to suppliers these days, you need to give them as much information other than pricing as possible. Link to their website. Your supplier doesn't have a website, don't use them as a supplier. That's simple. Your invoices are over a year old, can't use those invoices. Tell Amazon you're never going to sell anything or leave anything in FBA that's over a year old. That simple. Phone calls are how they reach out to suppliers. They don't email that often, typically. A phone call is quicker. Try to give a direct dial phone number. Try to give a good name and title for the person that an Amazon investigator should be talking to. Obviously, there are time zones. You know, this isn't like a foolproof system. There are time zones to be considered. If somebody in Seattle is calling China, I mean, that's a 15-hour time difference. So,
wow, that's fascinating. Yeah. I didn't know they were doing calls. I always viewed Amazon as email only.
Yeah, if you can't get an authenticity letter, I mean, some messaging asks you for a letter of authenticity. I'm not just talking about brand approval or ungating. I mean, for suspensions. Sometimes they actually want to see the authenticity letter from the supplier or the brand. And if you're coming back with, well, they won't give it to us, then that supplier doesn't really have any value for you in terms of your Amazon account. Maybe for eBay, maybe for Walmart.com, I don't know. But if your supplier is reluctant, I mean, if you're doing gray market sales, whatever it might be, and your supplier's like, well, we don't want to say that you're selling stuff in the wrong territory, or we don't want a phone call from Amazon, then their value to you is very, very limited. And that's it's upping the risk to the overall health of your account if you can't supply that kind of information. So.
Awesome. All right, man. Thank you so much for going overtime for this whole chat. It was so much value being exploded out to this audience, and you could tell by how engaged everyone was. I think everyone is just scared shitless about this stuff. And
no, it's not about fear. It's about current trends. I mean, I want to make that clear because there's a lot of misconceptions about, like, I mean, this is logical fear. There's fear that's illogical. Like, if I poke the bear, they're going to suspend me. That's irrational fear. There's fear that's based on data, that's based on experience, and there's based on crap I see every day. That's not just illogical fear. That's fear that's grounded in reality. So I had one person asked about my offer for the free consult if they buy the membership now. It's the membership link. If we see that you buy the membership anytime in the next 24 hours, which I'll add 10 minutes to 11:10 Eastern tomorrow, the 14th, you're going to ecommercechris.com/membership, and we're tracking who buys it within this webinar and within the next day. And all of those people will reach out to via email, or you've got my email address, chris@ecommercechris.com. You can reach out to me and I'll give you a free 30-minute call. So there you go.
Yeah, I was gonna say my bad. I already blasted your email address.
No, it's all right.
Sorry, man.
By the way, thanks for. I know this is your show, so thanks for having me on. We should do this. We should do this again. We should make like regular Q4 webinars. I mean, I don't know how regular, but kind of like what are the current trends? How to boot camp it? Boot camp emergency. We can call it whatever you want, but the questions that you guys got today were better than I get on some of my own webinars. So I don't know what that means, but.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
I try to be the Larry King of the Amazon world. So very appreciate that.
The Chris King.
And thank you all the viewers for kicking in and being so interactive. This was one of the most interactive webinars we've ever had. I think one of the most engaged webinars we've ever had. So cool. I think you really brought the action, Chris. So we'll let you go. Wrap up.
Chris.
Thank you, everybody. I'm going to turn my face back on. Thank you. Two Chris is better than one, man. It's just a common saying. So, and next time we'll get Chris Davey in here and try to do a three-way.
We'll have a list of links at the bottom of this, right?
Yep. Yeah. We're gonna. Well, no, it's gonna be in the handout. So in order to get those links, the emails, the formats and everything, you got to get the handout. And to get the handout, just respond to the email that you had inviting you to the webinar, or email either me or Chris. And the emails are in our chat thread now.
Yeah. Right, Mia. Okay, got it. Thanks. Appreciate it.
All right. Thanks, dude.
Bye, guys.
Later, everybody.